inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources and the editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member Magazine. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today we have part two with our visit from Betsy Atkins. We're going to be talking about instituting a board refreshment plan, but for those of you that didn't see the first part of our series, let me introduce Betsy formally. She sits on the board of Cognizant Technology Solutions, Schneider Electric, HD Supply Holdings, and SL Green Realty. She served on almost 30 boards during her career and served as a CEO of several companies as well. She's certainly a recognized expert and has also produced and authored this publication, Behind the Boardroom Doors, Lessons of a Corporate Director. Betsy, we had a great session with our first topic, which was crisis management. So now we're talking about something very interesting, board refreshment, okay? 5 years ago, it wasn't a term related to the boardroom, okay? But it's sort of evolved, relating to things like diversity of thought, of all the challenges that a board has with cyber. All of a sudden, this word of refreshment, meaning, don't have the same people for long tenures of time, sort of has been introduced. So this is well supported by investors. It's a favorite term of theirs. So when you think of the concept of refreshment, what do you think gave it birth, and why is it so important today?
I think the things that were the catalyst for the concept of board refreshment being front and center, first of all, was the rise of activism. There's a very interesting correlation if you look at the number of public company boards facing an activist or a threat of proxy action. And one of the things the activists focus on is board tenure, which they've correlated to some companies that have underperformed. So I think they took up the drumbeat first, and then you saw the big passive index funds like Vanguard and State Street put very large in-house corporate governance groups, 50 plus people, looking at things like board tenure, gender diversity, do you have the right directors going forward, and looking at tenure of directors and performance of company. And I think it correlates to me with the amazing velocity of change. Jim Collins, the great business author, wrote this book in the 90s, and at that time he said 40%, so almost half, of all companies disappear and no longer exist in 20 years. Well, now it's 50% are gone in less than a decade. So the velocity of change, look at the S&P 500. You were on that for at least 35 years. Now in the last 6 years, you had major companies come off. Heinz, JCPenney, Kodak, New York Times, and you had Facebook, Netflix, Accenture, go on. So the velocity of change relates to, do you have the right board members for the next 5 years for your company? And we see standards out of the UK where they say you're not independent after a decade.
Yeah, and I understand the tenure thing. The independence I don't get, because as we know, CEOs come and go, and I don't think there's any special allegiance to when a board necessarily brings in another. So, but I understand the tenure thing of wanting to bring in fresh blood. If you have a board of all 60 and 70-year-olds, they never had to, in their business careers, they probably weren't dealing with cyber. They probably weren't dealing with digital consumers. These are things that change businesses today. So I understand the idea of having maybe even some next-geners and having a mix of people that bring the most important diversity, which is diversity of thought. So we both acknowledge that this is probably a good term and thing to make effective boards. But the challenge is, how does somebody really go about instituting a refreshment program on their board?
So when you think about refreshing your board, it ought to be the same thought process you use when you think about CEO succession. You know, is our company perfect and we just want a CEO who will implement more of the same incrementally, faster, better profit? Or are we facing change? So if you believe you're facing change, then you ought to look at your board members and say, you know, are these people who have had multiple business models? Are they comfortable with change? In the past, you would pick an iconic director, somebody who had spent 35 years at American Express or 35 years at Procter & Gamble, and they really understood how that wonderful company worked. Well, now, with the rate of change in all companies, you know, if you're a retail company, maybe you don't want the board member who knows how Sears, Kmart, and Circuit City worked. Maybe you want the director who understands Warby Parker and eBay and Amazon, a born digital company. So you do need directors for your future, because the threat for a business is not that someone's going to cook the books. We have Sarbanes-Oxley. We had that with WorldCom and Enron. Now the threat is your company isn't relevant, it isn't competitive, it disappears. You need directors to future-proof the company.
So let me ask you this, though. There was a sort of a trend there for a while where people were going after what I call single-skilled directors,
Yes.
okay, where somebody might have been a CIO, but really had didn't manage a large area, wasn't involved necessarily in other areas of the business. And I think that the board world found that single-focused directors
Didn't work.
Yes. So when you're looking at the next gen, when you look at somebody in their 30s and 40s, and we're seeing a ton more of them join boards, you still have to look for somebody that has at least had that kind of experience. And interestingly enough, they're out there, but don't you agree that we'll probably see quite a change in the mix of boards as we go forward in the next 5 years?
Exactly. You wouldn't want someone who had only experience in one narrow area. So, you know, I'm a senior manager at Facebook, so I really understand social media, but maybe I don't understand cyber. I don't understand as well machine learning. I don't understand branding, or whatever it might be that you want. So yes, you do want the next generation, the millennial, the Gen X, but they need to have a broad enough experience set. And really, in my opinion, you're looking for people who bring flexibility of thinking on innovation, speed of change, and adaptability, and can embrace change to help move the board into a comfort zone to have the ability to respond to the velocity of change.
Now, I know you've been the nominating chair on multiple committees. We talk a lot about the show of the importance of board succession, okay? And particularly when you look at all the work that ends up in committees today. And again, we've had shows on unique committees that are good for a particular business. But as the head of the Nom/Gov committee, you constantly have to be thinking about who is qualified to take these board chairs, audit, comp, Nom/Gov, and then strategy or finance, or whatever other committee that one might have. So we have about a minute left, but just give me your thoughts on how you sort of look at the matrix and getting the right people so that you got people to fill these important slots.
So if I'm looking for an audit chair, I personally favor somebody who has been or is still a current CFO, because you really want somebody who can advise your CFO on IR positioning. So somebody from an audit firm might not have that line operating background.
Right.
If I'm looking for a comp chair, I want a general manager, if I can, who understands what bonuses worked in motivating, rewarding, retaining, and attracting. If I'm looking for a governance chair, I would want somebody who had dealt with a range of code of conduct, tone at the top, compliance issues. And I do actually think that it's time to broaden your governance committee's remit, because perhaps they can be forward-looking on strategy or technology or innovation, because after all, how many new directors are you going to bring on? And they're a standing committee. So I think there's some value in broadening what they do, and also bringing in regular outsiders for the board to educate them, whether it's from the consultancies or branding companies, whatever it might be that relates to your business. I think having outside speakers 2 or 3 times a year at a board lunch or dinner is a very important way to keep the board current and informed.
Well, we know that the number one issue for institutional investors last year and this coming year is board composition. So that will keep refreshment in the discussion. And I think we both agree that it's a relevant discussion to have. So once again, Betsy, it's been a pleasure to have you with us for this 2-part series. We appreciate you taking the time to join us.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, TK.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.